Okie dokie. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Activities for People Living at Home with Dementia. We are proud to offer this series with funding from the Area Agency on Aging and the United Way of Tarrant County. These programs are recorded and are made available for viewing through a YouTube channel for future use. I am your host for today's activities. Today we present the word seafood, brought to us by Peggy Spear with the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. We've been talking about this, Peggy, and we have no idea what kind of seafood you have in mind. So take it away.
It was one of those things where I was starting as crustaceans. Anyway, you'll see. They're all things you really want to eat.
All under the sea anyway.
All under the sea.
Oh, under the sea, right.
At one point, they were under the sea and they
Yeah.
were on the plate. All right. Here we go. All right. So we're going to start with this beautiful image taken by the photographer Edward Curtis, which some of you might be familiar with his work. He famously took images of Indian portraits that really put him on the map in these kind of pictorialist sepia tone images. And here is a photograph of his entitled The Clam Digger. So what do we see in this image?
He's up to his knees in mud.
Up to your knees in mud. Doing what? The title gives it away.
Digging clams.
It's kind of deceptive. I don't know if he's using the shovel or not, but a lot of times I use some sort of hoe or rake or something to do that.
There's actually on this particular image a note that the artist put about the particular tool that they were using, and he writes, let me quote it. Clams are an important tool to those who live in the vicinity of clam beds. To others, they are a comparative luxury obtained by barter. The implement of the digger is a wooden dibble.
So a wooden what?
Wooden dibble.
Yeah, got it.
Pickle.
Thank you.
So it's a little hand tool that comes to a point at the bottom. A lot of people can use them for planting as well, but
Yeah.
it helps. It easily goes in the sand, and you can easily dig it up without disturbing the clam too much with like you might with a shovel. So what else do we notice? So we notice this is actually a woman.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Did you? Yeah. What made you think that, Yetta?
I think it looks as if she has a long skirt or dress on.
And you can kind
And
of see the reflection of maybe a braid.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, men could wear a braid as well. This is an American Indian woman, but it is actually Curtis identifies this as a woman.
Yeah.
All right, so it's a woman bending over. What other details do you notice?
Well, there's a some container or something to put the clams in.
That basket.
Mhm.
Basket, yeah.
And the boat, there could be more people since it's a large boat.
Yeah. I'd hate to see that lady try to get that boat off the mud by herself.
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, we know for a fact she's not alone because why?
Somebody's taking the photograph.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we don't know if there were others with her just based on this photograph alone. And we also can't see the entire boat, but you can see behind the coastline.
Yeah.
And this particular photograph is taken. Let me back up. Curtis did he was paid by J.P. Morgan to take photographs of North American Indians. And this particular photograph was found in volume 9. He made 20 volumes. This was found in volume 9. And this volume focused on 4 nations located in Washington State, Puget Sound area. So Yetta, you and Hans, you guys might be kind of familiar with this landscape.
Right where we were.
Right where you were.
At the bottom.
And I'm sure while you were up there, you probably ate some delicious seafood while
We
you were
had
there.
a little bit, but not too much.
And did you eat any clams?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, that's what we had. We did have clams, yeah.
Clams
Yeah,
are my
sorry.
favorite.
This with fresh clam. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, clam. Yeah, and the artist notes in these volumes, in this particular volume, he noted that clams were the greatest demand of all of the seafood that we were able to get from the sea. So more popular than crabs, more popular than fish. Everyone wanted clams. So
Yep.
clams really were a big source of income, so to speak, for the American Indian nations living in there, in that part of the country. But what general sense do you feel with this picture? Does it feel hectic? Does it feel quiet? Does it feel peaceful? Does it feel stressful? What kind of vibe do you get from
Well,
this?
it's at low tide, so it's probably pretty peaceful.
Pretty peaceful.
Yeah, and there's no waves.
There's no waves, yeah.
And there's no activity in the background.
Yep.
It feels pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels, I mean, and I don't know about you, but it feels like if you were that person, it would kind of be just a nice moment for you and yourself. Granted, it's work, you're bending over and you're digging, but
Yeah.
your feet are in the water.
Yep.
You're having a moment to yourself. And it looks like the sun, the light source is coming from this side. So
Yeah.
the sun might be starting to set. But it's a very beautiful picture, I think. Does anyone like or dislike this picture?
Yeah.
What's that again?
So
The sky looks moody to me.
Yes.
it's probably about the only sound heard is a little bit of the water and the digging.
Oh, when I look at this, I said I think there's seagulls somewhere in the background.
Well, seagulls, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I will take kind of a peaceful moment and just rip you right out of it, that cawing sound. But yeah, and Curtis took the of the four nations. This one is Coast Salish. This one is from Coast Salish tribe, and so there isn't much written about her particularly, but this vision of, or this task of digging for clams was one that everybody knew and did and understood the importance of within this community. So
Yeah.
So we're going to leave our clams and we're going to go to this, I think, beautiful image of lobster pots.
Yep.
Hmm.
So this is our old friend, Elliot Porter, at it again. But what jumps out to you first?
The floats,
Oh, yeah.
These are actually buoys.
buoys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you would throw one of these lobster pots in, the buoy would hang up top of the water, so you can remember where you threw that cage.
Right.
Those colors look like Elliot Porter.
This color palette, the tonal effects he uses. This, to me, you're right. It's so Porter. If I didn't tell you it was Porter, it fits right in with all of this, the moodiness he does with his colors.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's very, to me, this isn't Porter in that it feels very patterned, which a lot of his artworks, when you're thinking of his birds that he's photographed in the past or pictures of churches down in Mexico, he doesn't necessarily have that finding patterns in nature about him. He finds the beauty in nature, but not necessarily the patterns.
Yeah.
Finding these patterns, to me, I don't know, it just is so beautiful and balanced and different composition than his typical. Coloring is him, composition feels a little different. Has anyone ever has thrown crabbing or lobsters? Have you ever done anything like that?
Well, I've done crabbing, but that's not nearly as more equipment than this. I mean, crabbing is mostly about putting some bait out and having a net just pull them in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have done crabbing too.
Yeah, crabbing I feel like is just as summertime as eating corn on the cob or something like that. Growing up, you always sat on a dock somewhere and just put a little chicken through the cage or the wire cage in and you sat there. Yeah, this is a little more lobster catching is a little more intense in terms of that, in terms of fishing for them. Then these cages are kind of spread throughout, so you're typically on a boat, you do have to pull things in. And I was talking to our curator about, Elliot Porter has a book published about, I think it's like 86, between 80 and 90 photographs from Maine. So Maine clearly meant something to this photographer. So I was talking to our curator about him because we have his archives. The museum has his archives. And so Elliot Porter vacationed in Maine starting at 10 years old every summer. And his dad ended up buying an island called Great Spruce Island. And so you can see right here where the red dot is, this little island his dad bought in 1912 and built a house on it. And that was where they summered every year through his childhood, through into his adulthood. And so over here is a state, or the mainland Maine. And then off the coast is Great Spruce. And so his dad built a big house on it, and that's kind of was the heart of the island for them. And his brother, Fairfield, ended up moving into the house when his parents passed away. And Elliot and his family stayed in another cottage that was on the house on a different side of the island. They stayed and not as elaborate of a homestead, but continued to summer there. And now Elliot Porter's son, Stephen, I believe is his name, he still summers there. And his grandsons come and stay with him during the summer. So the house is still, the island is still owned by him. The house is still there, and it's still a Porter summer spot. So as a 10-year-old, he was really inspired by the island. And the only way that they could get around is through the post boat, the post and mail boat that would bring to the island. So they would often go and visit these other little islands during the day, during the summer. And so this deer isle is where he took this photograph. You can see it.
Okay, I've got a question about this map. Say Deer Isle's over here on the right. So what's the marker in the middle supposed to be?
That's the island where they live, the Great Spruce
Okay,
Island.
where they lived. Okay.
Yeah, so that's where
There's
they
a whole
are.
collection of islands.
Yeah, it's a lot of little ones, and I'm not sure how big this island is, but here is the actual state, like Maine State, Maine, or mainland Maine, then his little island, and then other big islands that are very habited and things like that. So this is where he was inspired and actually took this photograph on Deer Isle. Are you guys lobster eaters?
Yeah, I've been to Boston a couple times, and I'd go immediately when I was going for supper or sometime for lunch. I go immediately down to the fish docks and eat whatever fresh lobster they had coming in that day.
It's amazing how the fish docks smell so awful and produce such wonderful product.
Yeah, especially low tide. Yeah, lobster rolls are real big in Maine. I'm sure if any of you've been to Maine, I think they hand you a lobster roll when you get off the plane there. They make you eat them. They're so good. But lobster bisque is also a really big one.
Lobster bisque is good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these are not, so we're not seeing the lobster. We're seeing the before of the lobsters, but I thought, these beautiful buoys you've probably seen hanging on, different restaurants or decor in people's houses, and these cages are just beautiful themselves. So we're going to go down a little further down on the East Coast to my hometown, Baltimore. And we're looking at a stereograph of what? What do you see happening?
They're showing oysters.
Shucking oysters. Can you tell me some of the things you see inside of this oyster house?
A lot of women.
A lot of women. Yeah.
Almost all women were the shuckers at this point in time.
And lots of shells on the floor.
Looks like there's one man in the back who's probably the supervisor.
Yep.
Probably.
I think you're right.
Not surprised, no.
Not at this day and age.
Looking at this, there are so many things this day and age that would not fly with this type of work. So have any of you ever shucked an oyster?
Yes.
Okay.
Was
Was it hard?
what's that?
Did you find it easy? Did you find it hard?
Well, when I lived in South Carolina, we the Boy Scouts used to go down to Savannah, and there's a canal that when at low tide and the month was right, there were both clams and oysters.
Mhm.
So we did clams and we got the oysters, and they are difficult to open up, but after they've cooked a little bit, they're much easier to open.
Okay. So you would let them maybe steam a little bit and then try to open them?
Yeah, we just threw them on the fire, quite frankly.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, here they're not, these are raw oysters that they're shucking right now.
Mhm.
And it sounds like you guys figured out an easier way to do it. But you did note, shucking oysters is really hard. It's also really dangerous. And so what these women are probably doing are using a nail and or some sort of like a split and a hammer to separate the oyster. They're not cooked or anything. These are all straight from the Chesapeake Bay, which was the #1 producer of oysters at this time in history. And then, so what you might do is you might use the hammer and split it, or there are little metal with a handle, kind of like a metal dowel. It's flat, pointed, almost like a knife, but pointed at the top,
Yeah.
and you could pull them open. You might notice none of these women are wearing gloves.
Nope. And I wonder what they do with the oysters once they get them out of the shell.
So what
Because
they would do, you can sort of see in this particular stall right here, they're angled, they're all in stalls and they're raised. So there's room for the oyster shells to drop. They would do it in a way that the oyster would drop in a pail or a big bucket that's hanging, and then they let the shells drop to the ground.
so what do they do with the oyster meat?
They would go in a bucket.
Oh, put it in a bucket. Okay.
Yeah, so they got it into a science where, the meat would fall, they don't have to touch the meat, and then the shells would drop to the ground. If one of them were to get injured, which we used to shuck our own oysters at Thanksgiving, and then my cousin Danny slipped, and we had to go to the emergency room. He went right through his hand, and because you're dealing with a living organism from water, salt water, it's like infection 101. So this is something that work conditions were really not great.
Oh my.
You can see the sun shining through. So
Mhm.
I'll tell you what, growing up in Baltimore, come August, it is muggier than all get out.
Yep.
It is hotter than Hades. And so you're not really eating oysters in the summer months. I'm not sure if you've ever heard the adage, if the month has an R in it, you eat oysters.
Yes.
Yes, I've heard that.
Very much
We followed that rule when I was in the Boy Scouts.
Did you really? Yeah, we still follow it. And some people say it doesn't really matter, but the thought is the water is too warm that the bacteria grows faster. So if you're eating raw oysters, you're kind of putting yourself at risk. But anyway, so then these women would go through, shuck the oysters, and then they would bring all of the oysters to the packaging room that was in another part of the building. At one point in Baltimore, during the peak of oyster canning, there were 116 factories lining the harbor. So you can even now go, the Industrial Museum is right on the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. I actually worked there for a while. That's the only cannery that's still, it's not canning anymore, but that's the only cannery that didn't burn down or wasn't repurposed for something totally different.
Oh.
You can go in, and they actually, as part of the field trip, which I still remember, that you reenact what that whole canning process was. So they have the people who are shucking, they have the people who are steaming the oysters, they have the people who are printing the labels to put on the cans, you have people canning the oysters. So each factory did everything from dredging and fishing for the oysters to packaging and selling their product. So this is only just one process of a multi-step operation that was being run.
So oysters are generally dredged from the
Mhm.
shallow water. They're not, nobody goes out and picks them one by one.
No, they're usually dredged, or boats would go out and they're almost like scissors, but they're raked,
Yes.
and they would just pick it up like that.
Yeah.
Now that whole area has been really over farmed.
Yeah.
Chesapeake Bay is not the largest producer of oysters anymore, and in fact, it's illegal to harvest an oyster if it's under 3 years old, because they're trying to re-up the population. So you can tell an oyster's age by the number of laps that it has. So if you can think of the backside of an oyster and it's pretty tiered, each one of those is a year of the oyster. So kind of like rings on a tree, you can tell the number of laps that it has to tell its age.
How
So,
cool.
but by the time you're looking for the rings on, it's already caught. It's already in your hands. So what are you gonna do? Throw it back in the water?
Yeah, right. So, you know, kind of, I think a lot of people who are farming these areas know what beds are new, what beds are probably ready for harvesting. But if you are, you know, in good faith, if you find an oyster, you should throw it back in if it's not old enough. So, but this is a stereo view, and it's from a series called Views of the World, and it's just showing different types of jobs that were in the U.S. at the time, what different working conditions were at the time. So, which in 1910, 1915, people probably weren't thinking too much about the working conditions, but it was interesting for people to see what types of jobs existed in the world. And you could view it from the comfort of your own home. All right, we've got one more. And our dear friend Elliot Porter. And what do we see here?
Crabs and oyster shells.
Crabs and oyster shells, and some.
They're not oyster, they're mussels.
Yeah, this, I can't tell if this is an oyster or a mussel.
That is a mussel.
Isn't it blue mussels?
Yeah, it looks like mussels.
Oysters have more spikes, rough surface than that.
All right, so who's an oyster, first of all, I didn't ask, who's an oyster fan?
What's that? What'd you say?
An oyster, who likes oysters?
If they're baked,
Oysters Rockefeller is good.
I was gonna say, if there's enough cheese on it, anything is good. So oysters Rockefeller is good.
Yeah. You know, I always just kind of swallowed them without chewing them too much.
That's kind of the only way. I love oysters, and there's a shot you can take in Baltimore, because everybody loves oysters, and it's called I think it's called Devil on Horseback, and put a shot on the bottom. The raw oyster on the bottom, a little dollop of cocktail sauce, and then vodka, and you shoot it.
Oh, geez.
What a waste of an oyster.
Yeah. And again, anything is good if you put alcohol on it. So
that's right.
What a waste of vodka.
Yes.
All right. Well, if you're not oyster people, then are you guys mussel people? Do you have any mussels?
Yes, like clams.
Mussels and clams. And scallops.
Yes, I'm not a big scallop fan, but the thing because you never know if they're cooked all the way. I feel like with mussels and clams, you know they're cooked all the way because the shell will open up.
You like crabs?
These are crabbies.
Scallops.
I also see a sea urchin in here too.
Yeah, there is one.
Oh, you love scallops.
Does anyone like crabs?
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Love crabs. These, I don't think these are Maryland blue crabs, but they seem to have been cooked because they're already red.
Yes.
I don't say that.
But again, crabs are the same way. Chesapeake Bay used to be the largest producer of blue crab, and now you can get it from Venezuela is a big producer, Asia, the Gulf, and so
in Alaska, where it's the dangerous job. What was that show?
Oh yeah.
What's it called?
But that's like king crab. Those are like the big.
Yeah.
These
Those
are
are deep water crabs.
The little dinky ones compared to those king crabs. But the same thing. they're under a certain amount of inches, you have to throw them back into the bag when you're crabbing in the Chesapeake Delmarva region. And a lot of people down here, it's funny because we always grew up eating crabs just because it was so easy to get. My husband, whenever we go back north, he's like, this is just too much work for such little meat. Bite your tongue. Bite your tongue. It's so good.
Folks, I'm gonna have to leave.
All right, Steve. Thank
See you
you.
next
Bye.
week. See you
Bye,
tomorrow.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
But this, again, feels like he very much balanced the photograph with the color. You can see it feels very anchored. He's keeping your eye within the photograph. I think it would be a different image if we didn't see the edge of that barrel or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it was all the rest of those shells. It would be different.
Good
Some
composition.
barnacles growing on some mussels over here on the
Can you
bottom.
see that?
Yeah.
All right, so I hope all of you eat some sort of seafood that now that your mouth is watering, my mouth is blood. But we'll probably eat hot dogs and hamburgers this weekend too because it's the 4th of July. Again, I got my dates mixed up. I thought 4th of July was not this week, but next week. So we'll do 4th of July next week. I need a
All right, that's fine.
We have you down for the 7th, so we can still keep celebrating. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we'll do 4th of July next week. We're just retroactively celebrating.
Okay.
We can
That's all
celebrate
right.
freedom anytime, Miss Peggy.
All right, y'all. Well, enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. We do
Bye.
enjoy
Happy
having
4th.
you here.
Y'all.
Bye-bye.
All
Bye.
right, Peggy. Bye.
Okay. Well, now that Peggy's not with us, let's take a look at what's tomorrow, and then we'll move right on into Fifth Street Cafe.
Okay.
Oh boy, tomorrow is Jeopardy. We're doing baseball teams tomorrow, and don't worry if you don't know anything about baseball. It's all either or.
Okay.
I figured that's a lot easier for us. It's easier for me.
Yeah.
My brain likes to have concrete choices. And that is teeing us up for baseball on Memories International Tuesday of next week. So we're going to be talking about baseball for quite some time, and this is just whetting our appetite for it. Let's stop that. Yes. I wanted to tell you one thing before we go to Fifth Street Cafe. Gail tells me that tomorrow at the Will Rogers Coliseum, there is a free event called Senior Synergy. They do everything from taking your blood pressure to giving people information about assisted living to how do I hire a personal care attendant to who's done my will, who can I talk to about house cleaning, everything that a senior might want to know. Senior Synergy is a big deal in Fort Worth, and it goes from 8:30 till 2 o'clock, no charge. Gail said that we could contact her for registration. However, I looked on the site and they say that online registration is closed, but you can walk in and register, and there's no problem with that.
Okay.
For the people who were registered, they guarantee a lunch, but if you're a walk-in, they may have some lunch left, they may not. So wanted you to know that.
Okay.
Yes. And I did what she told me to do.
Good.
So let me stop the recording here.